Aaron, thanks for joining me on this Testing Insights little interview. Today, I want to geek out with you on tooling and data and tooling approaches that organizations are making. Can you briefly introduce yourself? Let me know why you're relevant to talk to you about this topic.
Thanks. Yeah, it's great to be here. My name's Aaron Wroblewski. I'm a senior manager, machine learning at Zillow, and I lead experimentation, culture, platform, and science there. I'm the first person at Zillow that's dedicated to experimentation, and I'm there to drive this cultural change from a place that implements what we think is right for the customer and then leverages experimentation as a way to measure whether that's working or not, to our North Star, where we hope that anyone at Zillow can come up with an idea, test it, and grow it into a full feature or a full business.
I think that's fascinating. I didn't know that the first hire dedicated to that affecting culture. I think we'll have to do a follow-up episode. I've got some sets of fun questions that go into the culture, but today I've got this hobby horse this month focusing on tooling approaches, and I'm going to share my screen for a second. I'm going to flash this framework that I've been sharing on LinkedIn that places in perspective how different organizations or different parts of organizations are setting up tooling to do what we're talking about here, to do A/B testing, to do statistical decision making and the such. I want to flash the conversation that I'm having with Chad Sanderson on this. I'm going to have another conversation with Chad about the same thing next week and put out that conversation. So a back-to-back shotgun approach. But you could see here what I've got here, the framework generally and what's going on. I think that in the marketing sides of the organization that are focused on the customers, you've got tooling like traditional A/B testing, a lot of client-side testing. The assignment is based on users or sessions. The metrics we're used to, JavaScript, clicks and orders and things. And the analyses, A/B testing, so a lot of t-testing and such. As you go through product over to more complicated business logic types of functions and more complicated metrics like margin, Chad makes great arguments on wanting to assign on different types of objects, some backend or server-side entities and such. The types of tests that are available to do then can change in terms of going from t-tests, but also doing quasi experiments, which Chad talks a lot about. So this is the framework that I want to ask 3 questions around. Stop share there, kind of broaden things up a little bit about that framework and get your perspective on that, Aaron. First question is, what are your thoughts on that framework? Is there anything missing on that? Is there anything inaccurate? Is it too simple? Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Well, thanks for asking. I come from Zillow, which is a real estate company. And I'd love to talk a little bit about how we have some different approaches that we're using in the customer and the product area. Not really an expert on the operation side, although that's fascinating. And that's something that in my experience with Amazon, I was very interested in hearing about, but I'm not an expert in. On the customer and product side, some interesting things that you didn't capture in the slide are, like, for example, SEO experimentation is super important. SEO is one of the largest sources we have of traffic. I think it's about 60% of our traffic is organic from Google, which is really wonderful. We're so thankful for that. And as competition continues to heat up in the space, we're having to fend off on a local basis some of our competitors there. And so experimentation is super important for us. In the SEO space, we're doing assignment by page or by market. And so we have these sort of hyper-local experiments on the site that might just be relevant to a particular section of a particular page, may or may not be something customers interact with, but is something that we're testing to really highlight our user-generated content or our unique market content for search engines.
And the tooling to facilitate that, how does that look like? That's not with a typical third party then if you're...
It's a combination of things. So we've gone through cycles in our SEO testing, but the current approach is that we have some internal tooling for assignment, and we either do assignment manually in a notebook and upload that to our routing software, or we use this on larger experiments where we're just randomizing a large set of pages, like, for example, all of our home details pages. We might use our assignment service, which can randomize by any of our entities, user, page, whatever. And then on the back end, the metrics are really interesting for SEO. And we use a combination of internal metrics and also, third-party metrics that we get about how we rank in different regions and different languages.
So I want to poke you a little bit further because the main thing that I want to focus on is that there's this argument around third party tooling versus building your own platform. So this buy versus build.
Yeah.
In that scenario, what's that easy solution or the hard solution that Zillow is able to resource and actually tackle? Are there third party solutions that help you do the traditional user based assignment types of testing and the SEO testing? It sounds like for me, because you're assigning on page or market, that the third party tools like Optimizely is not going to be how you're facilitating SEO testing. That's going to be your own platform. Did I
Yeah,
get it right?
that's right. So overall, our experimentation strategy is moving from like totally siloed, where different business lines, different organizations made their own choices, to a more consolidated hybrid strategy. And in regards to SEO, it looks like we're moving toward a situation where we think that we can get a lot of value out of buying tools for assignment. And we think that the value that we can get out of that is assignment is a relatively simple but high operations task, especially for a site the size of ours, where we're doing more than 2 billion experimentation decisions a day. And so we think that by leveraging external tools for assignment, we can accomplish at least all of our current needs for the vast majority of our experiments across users, markets, and SEO. And then our special sauce is how we're measuring the customer's interaction with the product, and our philosophy and our metrics about how the business is performing are iterating a lot. So we think that we're best positioned to do analysis of experiments internally and
Mhm.
really customize that in the way that works best for the individual experiment and the individual business. Like, for example, you mentioned analysis in your slide, and you go over t-tests and multivariate testing and multi-arm bandits. Those are all things that our business customers are very interested in exploring. There's others as well. In some of our smaller businesses, Bayesian analysis has become like a really important framework for the smaller scale, a quick iteration, learning tests, where it's a two-way door. If we get it wrong, we're going to find out in a future iteration. There's not something that we're just launching forever and not going to measure again. And then the downside of not using something like Bayesian is we might want a frequentist test, and it's just going to be flat, and we're not going to know what to do. It's going to be hard to eke out a learning
Mhm.
from that experiment. So Bayesian has been really important. If you'll allow me to continue, there's one more
Yeah.
area that's not really captured on your slide that's super critical for us, that's been really valuable for us. One of the tools that we leverage is Optimizely,
Mhm.
and we leverage Optimizely. Like one of the key values that I see in Optimizely is this ability for Optimizely to support no code or low code deployment. And that has been something that's allowed our marketing team to iterate really heavily and make a lot of money, a lot of revenue, and a lot of conversions for Zillow in, for example, lead form pages, where small changes make a huge impact to customers' ability to convert and for their motivation to convert. And Optimize allows non-technical teams to visually make changes in a visual editor right to the page, and also allows us to, as those changes become operationalized, as we decide this is something we want to ship long term, allows us to take that code, bring it internal, ship it within our internal stack, and continue to leverage the same non-technical user controlled assignment and launch. And then on the back end, we're able to import all that data that Optimizely has about what users were assigned to what treatments and what the results that they measured were, and enrich that with all of our down funnel data. Did those users becoming Premier Agent customers? Did they become partner customers of Zillow? Did those users on a customer facing page end up converting and selling their home to Zillow or reaching out to a Zillow agent? And yeah, there's a very interesting trade off there And I think that capability of opening up who can edit the product and who can iterate in what's right for the product is really interesting. It's a really interesting capability.
Yeah, you nailed my second question there, which is great, like, in a couple different ways. But second question being, like, if you're focusing on the left side of the spectrum, the customer side, where you're wanting to use these third-party tools from the marketing standpoint and how they're coming in the door and acquiring them. You mentioned SEO there, but how are the tools explicitly enhancing that flywheel? And you mentioned on the assignment side, using tools like Optimizely with the no code situation, it just allows the accessibility, I think is the key word there. And then on the analysis side, that was a bonus add on you mentioned there, Aaron, about using the Bayesian approaches, just depending on like how quickly you want to push out those decisions and can the culture accept being wrong, and the Bayesian interpretation of the statistics helps facilitate that like culture a little bit better than the frequentist.
The
So
hardest part is that our teams depend on experimentation to help them make decisions. And the frequentist model leaves this large gap, flat tests, where we can't help. You did all the work to launch the experiment, run the measurement. I'm sorry, it's flat. We have no idea what to tell you about that. It might be -1, it might be +1.
yeah,
Um,
this is where I always make the argument that statistics is not a science, it's an applied science. And in this case, we're talking business applications and we need to make business decisions. But but I guess my third point, balancing that hybrid approach. And so your accessibility is a key principle and attribute of that hybrid approach that you've outlined. But is there a balance? Is there a trade-off? Right. So a lot of in the industry, I read from like Lucas Vermeer and I read articles that just came out around the experimentation gap. A lot of arrows point to mature organizations having a singular platform. Is that the ultimate destination? Because what you've talked about is not like this hybrid situation. It gives you benefits of accessibility. There are use cases of a third party tool like Optimizely.
yeah.
Does the horizon paint a picture of a single platform at Zillow? If
I,
not, or what are the trade offs? Can you speak to that?
I've heard Lucas talk about that, and I understand that point of view. I totally agree. I think that longer term, there's a lot of advantages of centralizing into a single platform. For one, if a marketer today tests something with Optimizely and it's a win, that's not the end of the road. We can't just launch that and expect that to live in Optimizely as an experiment launched at 100% forever. That raises a lot of operational concerns, which I won't go into. One of which Ronnie is on LinkedIn talking about this week, which is the latency that those tools introduce as you include them in the page. And we know latency is money, and we want to avoid that altogether, because the more latency we apply to customers, the slower our sites perform, the more likely users are to abandon, not complete their task. But I will say it's a really great solution for us right now, which is that we've got marketing teams with great ideas. We've got a company that's 2,000 engineers, only, what is that? Only 25% engineering. And so there's a lot of folks out there with great ideas that they want to test them, and they want to be able to prioritize them in that limited engineering bandwidth that we have. So I see a really great short to medium term space for those tools in motivating that innovation mindset and in motivating some of those specific ideas. Hey, like nobody thought this was going to work. We were able to try it and we got this result that showed that there's some promise here. Let's invest a little bit more in that. Let's get some tech teams involved. Let's bring it into the centralized platform. Let's operationalize it and continue to test it. I think there's a space for that, but longer term, and Zillow is investing in some of these capabilities today, we're looking for bringing some of those no code solutions in house. Like one really interesting thing we're looking at is, can we create an internal experimentation, low code, no code platform that allows users to customize React controls and then maybe one day edit their own React controls. We'll see. Definitely longer term, as we become more mature on the experimentation side, I'm really hopeful we can enable that full stack. It's just, we got to start somewhere.
Yeah. That's a good answer. So the way that I interpret that answer, like through the tea leaves, is that yes, it is on the horizon. It's just right now, this hybrid approach is what to use to address the culture.
We've got to treat the experimentation platform with an innovation mindset as well. We can't build it all on day one. We can't commit to building it all on day. This is a great way for us to see if this is going to work for Zillow and if we can create a sustainable pipeline of ideas that are growing into bigger ideas.
That's good to end with. I like to keep these short and sweet. So Aaron, thanks for going through that with me. Any closing thoughts?
I'm really excited to see what comes out of your future conversations. I hope you're going to give us the build by rubric that we can all use going forward.
Yeah. As a reminder, I'm going to be talking the same conversation with Chad, the same focus with Chad, and then also Ron Kahavi, Lucas Vermeer, Stephen Valpovich, Andre Morris, and I are having a conversation with one of his experimentation cohorts and those training learning sessions that Ronnie's doing. We're going to be talking about that. So a big sprint, thinking about this buy versus build. Aaron, you're my first guinea pig in this conversation, so I appreciate it. And yeah, we'll see what comes. Thanks again.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.